There are multiple Sufisms. What does the word Sufism actually, no one actually even knows what the word Sufism really means, even amongst Sufis. There is disagreement about why Sufis are even called Sufis. It seems to be based on a word that just means mysticism. I'll give you the 3 points of view of Sufis about the whole tradition, and then you can make your decision. Again, not all Sufis sort of have the same orientation. But all Sufis I've met fall into one of these 3 categories. As I mentioned, some Sufis believe that this very simple message of peace, of community, there's one ancient tradition that's very simple, don't make it into a creed or a cult, work with those inner parts of yourself that seem to be the ones that need to work with. Many Sufis believe that this was the original Islam. And then as one Persian Sufi once told me, later they made it into culture and politics. So that's first point of view. Second point of view is that the Sufi tradition is a reform movement in early Islam because after Muhammad passed away, which was in about a year or two after the Muslims finally returned to Mecca, Muhammad passes away, and then he leaves 4 successors, but there's a lot of infighting in the early Muslim community. And so within a generation, all of Muhammad's, you could say, successors, his closest students, they've all been killed by Muslim infighting. And the split of the Sunnis and the Shias happens and all of that. And then within a short period of time, the group that had opposed Muhammad the most and the longest in his lifetime, they take over the whole tradition again. If any of this sounds familiar to you, this is what happens. And they make it into this big imperial religion. And Muhammad is living, like an everyday person, a poor working person. Even while he's Rasulullah, he's living like everyone else. And when the Umayyads come in, they're living in these huge palaces. They're amassing huge amounts of wealth. And the question arises then in the early Muslim community, what do we do about it? Should we revolt against these unjust rulers? A. Should we let God sort it out, later? B. Or should we go off and do our own thing and try to keep the real tradition alive? So, according to the second point of view, the Sufis arose from that group that chose to go off on their own into the desert, back into the desert, and to try to keep what they consider to be the authentic message through Muhammad alive in its simplicity without becoming an imperial religion or a religion of imperialism. Third point of view, and this is in some ways the most radical, but it's also based in the Quran itself, because again, as I mentioned, Surah 30 says, "O Muhammad, the voice coming to you is the voice of an ancient sacred tradition, which is just the ancient ones. It was before Abraham even. It's a very simple tradition. There's one reality. This is it." And so this third group says, well, the first Sufi was really Adam, mythically, or Adam and Eve, mythologically speaking. It's just religion. You could say it's wisdom from the earliest times of humanity, mythically speaking. And it's kept alive in this form, in this name, for want of a better name. It's one form of indigenous wisdom that has survived. You could say the indigenous wisdom of the nomadic Middle East. So this would be the third point of view. And there's there's other colors in between these 3 points of view amongst Sufis, but essentially you will find, if you speak to most Sufis, you will find one of these 3 points of view. Now the Sufis quote different parts of the Quran than the fundamentalists do. The fundamentalists, if you want to call them fundamentalists, again, they're not just one group either. They've been tending to quote a lot of the Medinan surahs, which is like some fundamentalist Christians quoting a lot of St. Paul, where Paul's writing to the Thessalonians or the Corinthians or whatever, and it's meant for that particular group, but it's not necessarily meant for the other group. So similar things go on also in quoting of Quran, quoting of sayings of Muhammad like hadith, things like this. And that's the big, wonderful world within the multiple Islams today. So it's good to know, if you're reading a version of the Quran even, look inside and see where it was printed, who paid for it, what sort of translation are you looking at, because some translations of the Quran translate out all the universal passages. Literally, the ones that say, Muhammad, there have always been messengers and prophets, We make no distinction among them. There was Abraham, there was Jesus, there was all those whose names we don't know. We make no distinction among them. The Quran says it 3 or 4 different times. It says even the animals, the birds, it implies, are communities like you. They had their prophets. They had their messengers. The natural world have their prophets. So again, a lot of these passages are just sort of like excised from certain English translations of the Quran. And these tend to be the ones that are found most often because the people that pay for them have the most money in the Islamic world. And you can guess a little bit who those people are.